So, ladies and gentlemen, the next thing we're going to discuss now is what happens inside the head of a serial entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur most part of my life, and I always hear interesting definition. What is an entrepreneur? One of my favorite definitions of an entrepreneur is somebody who's prepared to steal office equipment at home and take it with them to work. Somebody who's so passionate about seeing if that dream comes true. Or with the words of Richard Branson, somebody whose curiosity of seeing if it works is bigger than his or her fear that it will not work. That's an entrepreneur. I've written a book about entrepreneurship, and I've interviewed entrepreneurs. I've interviewed Richard Branson. I've interviewed many, many fantastic entrepreneurs to try to find out what makes them tick. And there are many different types of entrepreneurs. They do it for different reasons. But my favorite one, it's the serial entrepreneur. It doesn't matter if they sell their companies, become super rich. They don't go play golf. They start thinking about their new idea, their new company. And when I had the idea of Result 12 years ago, I went to one of the guys that I was most impressed with. He'd founded Icon Media Lab, the largest web agency in Europe. I think there are 3,000 people now or something like that. He founded Let's Buy It, 10 years too early, and all kinds of other things. And I said, so Erick Wikstrom, because this is the gentleman's name, if I want to start this company, what do you think I should do? He said, I think you should do it, and here's the money, here's the seed investment. And since then, he's lived in China and invested in companies there, and now he's come back and joined us in Result. So Erick Wikstrom, please, the stage is yours. Come up here. Come on up, have a seat. Welcome to sunny Barcelona. The next entrepreneur is somebody that always tells me about something that I think sounds like bullshit and it's never going to work. And then 2 years later, he sells the company to Google, and then he comes back and then he starts a new company. And it's one of the most respected and knowledgeable entrepreneurs from the Nordic region in Finland. Erick Wikstrom, please come up here. Founder of Jaiku and now founder of Ditto as well. Hey, welcome up on stage. Have a seat next to Erick. Have a seat, yeah. So, a lot of the people in the audience are entrepreneurs. Some others are guys with great jobs thinking about quitting it and start a company. You're both serial entrepreneurs, and I'll start with you, Yuri. So why do you start companies?
Well, in my case, I think that I tried everything else before becoming an entrepreneur just because I had nothing else left that I could do, because I failed at trying to be a researcher and trying to work at different companies. So I think the honest answer is that, I find people become entrepreneurs because they just can't do anything else. It's the only thing that they can do, because they can't really work for anybody. They want to be their own boss. They have something that they want to create, and they just kind of go out and get it. People who drop out of school. It's kind of like the people who you'd never expect to make it in life who suddenly kind of surprise you by coming up from behind with something new.
That's one part of entrepreneurs, and they've not gone to school sometimes, they're not as sharp as a knife in the box, but then they create fantastic companies. But there's also other, you came from a different background as an entrepreneur. You had a great job, you were good at it.
Yes, I did, although I actually started my first company, I think, when I was 15. Mm-hmm. Yes, I did a couple of years in the traditional industry, but it was actually fortunate enough to be in a very entrepreneurial conglomerate called the Modern Times Group, or the Kinnevik Group, which is one of the larger media houses in Scandinavia. And where I was taught a lot by the leader of that company, Jan Stenbeck, and his management team about entrepreneurship within a large organization. So it was a very, very entrepreneurial spirit in that company, and you were allowed to do failures, you were allowed to try new things.
So if you would have started working on a bank, maybe you wouldn't have become an entrepreneur, or do you think that entrepreneurship would have pulled you out?
My stigma is that I have a problem with authority, so I don't want to have a boss.
So that's something that you share, but then you left the large corporate environment and you started Icon Media Lab back in '95 or something like that. Nobody knew what the web was, but you were sort of starting web businesses. Did you guys see something others didn't, or were you just taking a lot of risk?
No, at that time I was totally convinced that we were going to make it. It's one of those foolish things that you start thinking about an idea, and when you can't get it out of your head after 2 months, you know that you just become hype yourself that it has to be the greatest thing, and then you just dream about it, and then you just have to do it. So no, I didn't believe that we took on a lot of risk. Of course we did, but in hindsight. But at the time, no, I was totally convinced that we were going to make it.
So the 3 things that you would wanted somebody to tell you before you become an entrepreneur about entrepreneurship, things that you learned the hard way.
Okay, well, I'll just pick a random example that comes to mind first is, for instance, a lot of people expect that companies need to have, let's say, for instance, a board of directors. So you invite investors or somehow senior people to join the company board, and then they're supposed to sort of guide you as an entrepreneur, especially if you're a first-time entrepreneur. I find nowadays that I do a lot of angel investing that this comes up frequently. First-time entrepreneurs are uncertain, and they feel like they need senior people to come on board and become board of directors and then sort of guide them along the way. And my advice would be, for instance, I wish somebody had told me this when I started out, that's totally unnecessary. Like, it's perfectly okay for the board to have just one member and that be you. Like, don't invite people.
Just for the sake of it.
Right, just for the sake of it. Like, once your company has grown to a certain size, then, eventually you'll end up having a board of directors, and it's kind of necessary for running the company. But there's a lot of this overhead that you should be just constantly looking at cutting and not be afraid of just like doing things the way that you your gut says they need to be done, even though there may be rules or just common practices out there that you kind of take for granted. And I think that signals a great entrepreneur. You can see it in things like, I don't know, if you look at, people here might remember Flickr, one of the early Web 2.0 companies that really made it big, and they did everything differently from the way they rewrote their, for instance, their policy for terms of services, these legal documents in a way that people could, for the first time, actually read and understand what was being said and actually enjoy because they were kind of funny. So you can take something like a legal document and you can rewrite it into something that people can connect with. So it's looking at ways of just doing things that nobody else has really looked at and just doing them differently. And that's really, I think, what signals a great entrepreneur from just a mere good entrepreneur.
And Jaiku, when you told me about it, I didn't get it. Tell everybody here. And now you sold the company, obviously, to Google. But what did Jaiku do?
Well, I think everyone initially, Jaiku was one of the first microblogging companies. This is similar to Twitter or Facebook nowadays, posting short status updates or tweets, messages, 140 character messages that pretty much everyone nowadays has to do if you want to have an identity online. You either have a Twitter or a Facebook page or both. And when we started Jaiku, I would talk to people and explain, well, it makes a lot of sense that you type a short message and then you can just share it with everyone. And people would totally look at me incredulously and say, why would I ever want to publish what I'm doing? Who on earth would be interested in that? But it turns out if you look at the growth of things like Jaiku, like Twitter, like Facebook, that 750 million people are posting status updates almost daily now. So it just works, and it works because it's the fundament of the internet is to lower transaction costs between people, and it enables us to communicate with a broader set of people more efficiently.
And now you're sporting a Ditto t-shirt. What is Ditto? Ditto is your new company?
Right. Yeah, Ditto's my new company. So after Jaiku we sold Jaiku to Google, and then I worked at Google for a couple of years, starting up their social products and their mobile web products. And then I left Google to become an angel investor and did that for about a year and realized that I'm really more an entrepreneur than a portfolio manager. So, and I had an idea that came out of Jaiku, which was that the most useful part for me of posting those messages was when I would say things like, I'm in Barcelona, I've never been here before, where should I have breakfast this morning? And then, people would respond and say, oh, you should check out, the cafe, this particular cafe is wonderful. And I would discover new things and I would make new friends that way. And I realized when I went back and I looked at it that what it really was about was getting recommendations from people in real time as I'm moving about through the city. And what Ditto is a way of trying to do that even more easily. So it's just a very simple way of announcing your intent. It's an iPhone application. You can download it from ditto.me for free. And you just tap and say things like, I want to eat out, or I want to see a movie. And then people can respond and recommend things to you.
And there's a social context, of course, in this as well. You can connect with them and so forth.
Right. What often happens is, here I am and I'm saying, I want to see a movie, and it could be that you mentioned to me, oh, you should totally go and check out Source Code. It's a really great thriller that's out there. And if I go and I see that, I'm like, well, gosh, that was a good movie. That will make you, Ola, much more interesting. I'll appreciate you next time we can talk about the movie and what we thought about. So it's these things I call social objects, and they're really not just about getting a purchase of something done. It's actually about us having a deeper relationship with each other through that movie.
So Eric, you've been working in Beijing for many years. You've also been a stint in San Francisco and in the Nordics, and you've seen lots of entrepreneurs, both working with them and investing. What entrepreneurs do you think are the good entrepreneurs? What do you look for in an entrepreneur? Who are the winners?
First of all, I think it's difficult to sit on a stage that say that, all right, this type of person, if you're not that, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. First of all, I think that everyone should be an entrepreneur and should try to be an entrepreneur. And the only way to find out is to do it, if you're good or not. But once again, I don't think it's one person. I mean, I typically don't like just one person. I like teams. I like complementary teams. No one is a Swiss Army knife. Yeah. It just doesn't work that way.
And how many people
maybe
is
one
the
or two,
ideal
but
team?
Not most of us. Mm-hmm. Sorry?
How many people is the ideal team?
It also varies, but typically if you're 5 or 6, you're probably going to start fighting. Might be good that 1 or 2 leaves, but 3, 4 tops. One great sales guy, one great developer if you're in tech, and one great HR people person maybe. Because probably the sales guy and the super tech guy is probably not good to take care of your staff.
And is there any better place for doing entrepreneurship? Is it like if you're in Silicon Valley, it's much better, or is it no? It's so high competition there, so it's much better if you're in Gdansk or where you're the big fish. Or
well, once again, I think that it could probably, but I think it's marginal. I don't think that's where the battle's at. If you're based maybe if you're based in Ulaanbaatar, it would be more difficult than if you're in San Francisco. But between Beijing, San Francisco, or Barcelona, or generally in Europe, I think the question is that it's the idea and your determination and your passion of making it happen. Mm-hmm. And if you have that passion and your idea is good enough and you have the willingness to put in the hours and the hard work that actually means to be an entrepreneur and to start your own company, then where you're located doesn't matter.
Martin Wiersowski, the founder of FON and Jastel and many other companies, he said that being an entrepreneur is like being a spermatoos. It's like being a sperm. Not everybody hits the egg. Yeah. And he said, if I'm saying here on stage that it's great to be an entrepreneur, a lot of you won't hit the egg. What do you think about the risk? I mean, face it, most companies don't go well. I've screwed up a lot of companies. Maybe you have too. What about that? What about the risk and the risk of failure? How do you look upon that?
Well, I think it's about fear. I think it's probably dishonest to say that an entrepreneur shouldn't be afraid. I think, yes, you should be afraid of failing, and fact is most likely you're going to fail. Again, the difference is like, who are the people who, after failing, pick up the bits and pieces and just go straight out and try again, because that's eventually what's probably going to happen to you at least once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. You look at these great companies, and what we hear about is the successes, right? Mm-hmm. I just mentioned Flickr. Flickr started off as a game that didn't make it and pivoted into something else. There's this great concept of the
pivot. It's great because Katarina Fake, the Flickr founder, is here in the audience. Will join us on stage later, so we can hear more about that.
Fantastic. So this idea of a pivot, I think, is something that doesn't really get enough attention as I think it should, because
so pivot is a take-home value. So pivot is the ability for a company to start doing this and then doing this, which is much smarter,
exactly,
and eventually turning into a great company.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where the entrepreneurship comes in. It's where you realize that you find something out. Like for instance, with Jaiku, we started off creating a travel site. And kind of halfway through that, we realized, oh my God, there's this other thing where we're doing this on the mobile, where it makes a lot more sense to actually allow people to, instead of talking about which city they're going to say like which restaurant they're going to next or so on, just making it much more, because that's what people use much more daily, on a daily basis. And in fact, these ideas ended up splitting into two, and Jaiku was created as a mobile microblogging thing, and then this other company called Doppler kind of emerged out of that, and the team split and created two companies sort of independently. So oftentimes when you start out, you don't know what the outcome is going to be.
And one sold to Nokia and one sold to Google.
That's right.
But if you take on investors, how do you think? And if you've been on both sides, both of you, both as angel investors and raising capital. If you're starting a company and you want capital, how would you do it? Would you sort of go to nice Uncle Bert, or would you go to Sequoia in Silicon Valley, or would you, how do you look upon raising capital?
Can I take a crack at that?
Yeah, please.
Well, just in my experience, first of all, now is probably a better time than ever to be out there as a new entrepreneur who's never done anything with just an idea, because there's a lot of what people say, the market's frothy right now. There's a lot of, especially seed stage money out there. So it's, probably a better time than ever to be raising a very small round as a first-time entrepreneur. So I encourage everybody who's got an idea to go at it right now.
But does it need to be an ambitious idea, or could it be small money for a small idea? Or do you urge people to think big in an early stage?
Oftentimes you don't even know how big it's going to be before you actually go and you try it out. So that's the most important thing, is just to go, like you said, and just give it a go and see if it works. And then you'll realize that this may be big, or, it's going to be small. But for that, you oftentimes only need, $10,000 can get you, 10,000 euros can get you very far. And that's not a lot of money to raise. And there's great alternative ways of doing that now, too. There's companies like Kickstarter out there where you can just post an idea and then, get people to donate you money. And
what was it called, the company?
Kickstarter.com.
Kickstarter.com?
Yeah, so you don't even need to do a traditional round. You can do, just create it as a project and then watch and see if it generates interest. That's always how I've done my companies, is I start talking about the idea.
So you don't have secrets, you start talking about it.
That's right. So a lot of people will do the exact opposite, where they say, well, you got to hide your idea and you got to be secretive about it until you launch. And I'm completely the opposite matter. I think you should start talking about it immediately, because that's the only way that you can actually get other people interested in supporting you.
And what's your take on it?
I mean, most of the time, I totally agree. I think now is probably the best time in 10 years to raise money. Secondly, ideas are not really worth that much. It's in the execution that everything's going to happen, and it's probably not going to end up being what you thought it was going to be anyway. So, out there networking, trying to do something. I mean, the biggest threat is not to do anything. There's a Chinese proverb saying that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And the whole point being, act, do something, build a demo, create a website, do something. Then network at events like this, talk to people, but the biggest threat is not doing anything and just talking about it.
Right. So we're going to do something. We have an Indian young gentleman. He was acing his school. He's been helping us out with Simon, other things as well. And he's the next generation entrepreneur. So I'm going to invite him up, because in the future he's going to have 1.3 billion friends, and we're probably all going to ask him for a job. So he's going to be an entrepreneur, and he's going to ask you some questions. So Mahesh Kumar, all the way from Chennai, India, come up on stage, please. So please have a seat.
Thank you.
So these guys have created billion-dollar companies and flunked them, and they have been around some of the greatest company builders. Now, shoot away, ask questions.
So, Yuri, the question to you is, you sold Jaiku to Google, and if you look at the blogosphere, we were all almost ticking down when he's going to start his next company, and it was not too long away. So if I'm the CEO of Google, or if I'm the CEO of a large company, what should I do to retain a guy like you?
Well, I think that a lot of people sort of expect that as an entrepreneur, once you've had an exit, whether it's through a public, listing on public markets like an IPO, with something like Icon, or selling the company to another big company, that you make a lot of money, and then you kind of that's when you retire. And I think it's the exact opposite with entrepreneurs, is that that's actually the point at which you want even more. You want to go back and you want to do it better, because you look at all the things you did wrong, and you want to go, and next time you want to do it right. And the challenge is, with large companies in acquisitions, typically what happens is, my advice would be, for those of you who are in a position where you're looking at possibly getting acquired, is to consider, what role are you going to go in that company as being? Because what motivates you is actually not making money. It's like Guy Kawasaki says, making meaning, making a difference. Can you make a difference in that company that you're about to go and join that larger company? And oftentimes with large corporations, that's where the problems come into play. You, as the CEO of your startup, you can make a difference. You can change everything, right? You can pivot. The next day you come to work and you can tell people, okay, we're going to start doing this new thing now. In a large company, you probably have a lot less power, and that's really, I think, the big problem, what causes a lot of entrepreneurs to leave. And so as a CEO of someone like Google, talk to Larry, as CEO of some other large company who's looking to acquire somebody else, what I would say is, how can I empower that CEO to, not make less of a difference by joining us, but make even more of a difference? Because that's the best way to motivate somebody like that to actually come on board and perform even better than they did in their startup.
That's fantastic. And Eric, you've run a lot of companies, you've worked with a lot of teams. What do you think is, if you had to give 2 key principles in building and motivating a team, what would that be?
I think that my experience, if you say that from an investor standpoint, if I would invest in your team, and I wouldn't want to boggle you down too much, but I want you to really excel. I think it would be working on just high-level plans and then get out of the way.
And if you were the CEO of the company?
Then I think part of it is to have a very, very clear vision and meaning for the company. I happen to love Kawasaki as well when it comes to make meaning. Most people are driven by peer respect and by doing something that's worthwhile. Money, of course, I would be lying if I wasn't an entrepreneur to make money as well. But at the end of the day, that's not really every morning where you go up and you feel energized about going to work. It's because you're doing something that's worthwhile doing, and you're doing it well. So clear vision, clear purpose of the company. And most businesses can be interpreted in different ways. I mean, Amazon, you could say that, well, we are selling books, but if you want to try to make meaning out of that, you could turn it into something that becomes much more meaningful for your team. And it's a question of ironing out exactly what that is, that gets people energized, so they actually feel that you're not just working as a bricklayer, you're actually building the most beautiful cathedral in the world here in Barcelona.
So fusing the 2 answers, I guess, would be a clear vision and a sense of purpose when it comes to building and motivating a team. I don't know how much time we have. I don't want to see myself with my Rolex. Should we open it up to to the audience?
Yeah, let's bring in some audience questions. Anybody has a question for the panel? So we have a question here. Please say who you are and then your question.
Hello, I'm Jakub Šťastný. I'm IT developer from London, and I wonder, why do you think so many startups are in California and not that many in Europe?
Do you really want to take that one? Why are so many companies in California that are startups and not in Europe?
Okay, I can take a crack at that, being a European who operates out of San Francisco at the moment. I started Jaiku in Finland, which at the time wasn't really recognized as a place where a lot of startups came from. We had one big company, Nokia, that everybody knew, but outside of that, there weren't really any at all. And so what I discovered was as long as you identify the people out there anywhere in the world that really can help you move your company, your idea forward, it honestly probably doesn't matter that much where you're based. It's kind of what Ola was, to the point of that Ola was saying. Because nowadays, because you have blogs, you have things like Twitter, Facebook, you can travel with relatively low cost. You can go and you can get those people and you can get them interested in what you're doing. And that's the way that Jaiku grew, like, you know, literally like a 7-person team based out of Finland, but we had a developer in Silicon Valley, we had a couple of guys in different parts of Holland, we even had a guy working out of New Zealand who I never met, you know, who was working for us and was one of our best employees. And all these people came together because I was out there putting the idea out, talking about it, and you can come together online nowadays and collaborate.
But that answers a very good question, is how you can stay somewhere and still create an interesting international group. But the question was, why do you think there are more companies in Silicon Valley than in Barcelona? What do they have, and can we copy that? Can we create something like that in Dublin or in Stockholm?
And my answer to that would be, I think you can leapfrog that. So you shouldn't look too much at what's going on. Why did Silicon Valley succeed? There's a lot of analysis, and I think way too much conversation that's already been done about that. What we should be thinking about is, how can we create something new that's not trying to replicate Silicon Valley, but that's trying, you know, that's just building your great startup, just focusing on your great startup. And if you're doing it out of Barcelona right now, what you can do is get online, just get going, you know, talk to people, read Chris Dixon's blog, you know, whatever, you know, call up, you know, the Valley investors are investing in Barcelona just like any other city right now, just because there's all these great companies that are shooting up all over the place. So the world has really changed in the last, I think, 12 to 24 months in a fundamental way, where it's no longer just about Silicon Valley.
But there's an interesting point in what you were saying. It's also that you have to reach out, you have to be there, you have to be on the tech blogs or call the Silicon Valley investors as well. Because otherwise, if you're in Finland, you'll run out of investors or you'll run out of interesting people after a while.
That's right. We had advisors from all over the place, Silicon Valley, Japan. You know, we even had a guy from Italy as an advisor. So there's ways you can do this as long as, you know, and people really don't care because, you know, to them you seem like a Silicon Valley company. Like a lot of people thought Jaiku was a Silicon Valley company. We were based in Finland, but nobody really realized that because it seemed like we were everywhere. And you can get that done. As long as you are everywhere, meaning you are actively participating in the conversations online.
We have time for one more question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I have a company of physical exercises, and we have an excellent product or service. Our success until now is based on word of mouth. Our service, and people, you know, go around and say, you know, I do this exercise and it works, and I'm trying to get into the internet, in, you know, social media and all this, but I find it difficult to get into internet and use it as a tool to expand our product. Maybe part of it because of my age, you know, I'm not like, you know, age-wise I'm not young, so there's a blockage there, and I sort of have difficulty to get it, you know, moving and get into the internet to use it as a tool.
I'll take a first stab at that question, because I was with the CEO of Schibsted, and he was 65, and they were just doing so many things on internet. And I asked him, how did that come? And he said, well, I had an intern. I had a young kid working for me that was 20, and I didn't understand half of the things that person was saying, so I realized we weren't understanding everything that the younger generation was doing. So just bringing in a lot of young people, or even one young person that works really, really close to you, I think that can be a way of sort of getting going online. I don't know if you have more.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Another way, or something that I would do if I were you, and if I worked with you, if I was that kid that you brought in as an intern, I don't know if you have internships available, but maybe we can talk about this later, is look at your customers. Like you said, it spreads by word of mouth. That's a really, really great sign. So who are the kind of ambassadors out of the people who already are using your product? And then talking to them and usually seeing, because the way that this stuff works is on, you know, the whole Web 2.0 idea is built on the idea that you build a platform. And then on top of that platform, like if you're a Groupon, if you're a Facebook, if you're a Twitter, if you're even somebody like a Jaiku, you have other people who rely on you to get their business done and who kind of do your marketing for you, so you don't need to market yourself. And so how can you get to be that sort of platform? Well, usually it comes by just looking at your most passionate users and talking to them and seeing how they can actually then distribute your product to larger audiences, right? Instead of you trying to reach everybody, you just like, so I would talk to those passionate users that you have and find out, how you can turn those people into ambassadors for you and work for you even better than they do right now.
So you're also going to be around, so you can grab these gentlemen and talk to them as well. With that, I'll have to thank you for a fantastic panel, and thank you very much for coming here and sharing. Big round of applause.